Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Okay, so firstly, a little bit of feedback required from everybody, if you can. Um, I am now using a slightly better microphone, and I just, I'm not going to claim that I am a kind of a whiz in the studio or anything like that. And it has been mentioned in the past that sound quality, subject knowledge, great. Sound quality maybe needs some work. So I'm kind of wondering how this is for you. So it'd be great to get your feedback on the experience today. Now, before we get into looking at our core topic today about kind of ideas on revolution. I want to let you know about our key announcement, and I'm going to be going on about this for the next couple of weeks. But our Russian Revolution and Stalinism masterclass is on Sunday, January the 25th at 3 p.m. UK time. This is for students to learn top grade essay structure and unpack new ideas about the Russian Revolution, Soviet history up until the beginning of the Second World War, and to look at how to get inside the mentality of the examiner, the person marking your essay, what they're looking for, and how to also master your own mindset, how to avoid the exam panic and all the other stuff that kind of goes on when you start to sit in front of an exam paper and think, what am I doing? Okay, so it's an inside game. It's understanding the examiner. It's subject knowledge. It's practice and a bunch of other stuff besides. And it's the kind of stuff that when I've taught it in the past, that has been the kind of the game changer. I'm packing all my kind of game changing ideas and knowledge about exams and essays into 90 minutes. Make sure you get on it. There's a link below. There's only 100 places. So this is kind of, if you want in, get in now to avoid disappointment. Okay? Righty. So in the last couple of days, I've talked a lot about the unbelievable and shocking events of the last, kind of 72 hours regarding Venezuela, and I'm going to keep coming back to that, but not in this episode. Um, there's so much more to be said about the big sort of geopolitical picture and what this is going to mean for us all. But today we're bringing it back, and this is partly as a result of the study focus we're going to do, but also it's a way of just kind of exploring approaches to thinking about revolution. Okay, so one of when you look at, say, for example, the Russian Revolution is hard objectively to explain through kind of conventional conventional historiographies. Um, the, the 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 various kind of explanations sort of fall short when you actually look at the robustness of the Russian state. There are a number of different historiographies. The first, of course, being the Soviet one. The Soviet one that is the product of Marxist Leninism, and which essentially, with the kind of reactionary turn that is Stalinism, presents us with a kind of a very unsatisfactory answer that of essentially of historical inevitability, that ultimately the laws of the iron laws of history mean that the revolution was an inevitable outcome. Um, the problem with that, obviously, this draws from Marxism, but the problem is that Marx didn't see Russia as being the likely choice of a revolution. He said ultimately he didn't think it was likely to happen there, or even that it should happen there. He believed it should happen in Germany, and that the material conditions for revolution didn't exist in Russia and weren't going to exist in there anytime soon. So you have to ignore a fair bit of what Marx said in order to substitute, to kind of go with the Soviet position. But from the life of the Soviet Union, if you don't go with the kind of Marxist-Leninist answer, then it starts to kind of chip away at the foundational ideas of the state, and no state will tolerate that. So inevitability, I mean, there's nothing inevitable about the Russian Revolution. There are a number of moments where, had things been slightly different, had the Tsar made slightly fewer catastrophic errors, it could be argued that the Tsarist state would have maintained itself. Would it have maintained itself for 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Would it have survived, for example, the end of the First World War and survived the Great Depression? I mean, again, who knows? Would fascism have come to Russia? There were proto-fascist parties. So perhaps you look at the Marxist-Leninist position and say, well, if it's a product of fluke in 1917, then arguably it would have happened eventually. The Soviet Union, the orthodox Marxist school, presents us with a picture of a heroic proletariat and a vanguard leadership from Lenin, which is, I mean, certainly there is a vanguard leadership. The Bolshevik Party, this small conspiratorial revolutionary party that, from Lenin's book What Is to Be Done onwards, takes this kind of historical shortcut, this idea that if you're waiting for the masses to organize themselves, you'll be waiting a very long time, by which the Tsarist state will have figured out how to kind of insulate itself from revolution, and you'll be done for. And the extent to which there is a mass proletarian uprising, as depicted in Sergei Eisenstein's films, is entirely doubtful. The numbers of people actually involved in the October Revolution are very, very small. Not to say that the revolution doesn't, the October Revolution doesn't spread, and the news of it, as we've seen previously when looking at Sarah Badcock's book, Politics and the People in Revolutionary Russia. It's not to say that when news starts to be transmitted via telegraph and train from Petrograd, that the revolution doesn't spread and then becomes a kind of a more mass affair. Okay, but there are, as we can see in the orthodox Marxist version of things, there are issues with that explanation. The liberal or traditionalist school, which lasted from 1917 to the 1960s, dominant in the Western world during the Cold War, which was often led by Russian émigrés and Western scholars who viewed communism as essentially an evil. Their core argument is that the revolution is a coup d'état, a violent seizure of power by a small, disciplined group of fanatics, the Bolsheviks, who lack popular support. Now, I mean, there is a grain of truth to that, that it is a coup d'état, that it is a seizure of power. The only thing I can argue that is that it's not possible to seize power from a functioning state. A state that is robust and is operable and is operating is largely unassailable for the most part. It has all the means of mass repression at its fingertips that it needs to use.
The Omaha Steaks end-of-season sale is here to deliver everything you crave to reset after the holidays. From handcrafted USDA-certified tender steaks to gourmet burgers, versatile chicken and pork, and more. You know exactly what you're getting. Premium, lean protein that everyone loves. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide during their end-of-season sale. And for an extra $35 off, use promo code AUDIO at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details.
So a violent seizure of power can only happen when the state has stopped functioning anyway. Um, the Bolsheviks are a small part, a small group of people. They lack popular support. Well, they don't win in the November elections. They lose to the SR, the Social Revolutionaries. Um, and the liberal argument argues that the revolution was not inevitable. Now, the only thing that I can say to that is, well, as with so many things, inevitability is a teleological concept anyway. So we're dealing with kind of some low hanging fruit here anyway. That the only reason why we say things are inevitable is because they happened, and then we kind of work backwards without ignoring all the kind of the potential parallel histories where they don't happen, which is a kind of a I'm not one for these sort of Niall Ferguson type counterfactuals or anything else really involving Niall Ferguson. But the sort of the what ifs are kind of a bit of a waste of time because we could be doing those endlessly. However, inevitability in itself is also a thinking error. A key problem with all of this is that we focus on the great men theory of political history. So the liberal view looks at a kind of a key issue. Russia was modernizing. Russia goes through this incredible industrial spurt till about 1913. Living standards were beginning to improve. All of this is true. The miles of railway laid down in the decade before the First World War expand dramatically. You have markets in Europe receiving farm produce from Siberia, like literally trainloads of milk and yogurt and things like that are traveling in a short period of time, a few days, to markets in Poland and Germany. There is there's a brilliant book called The Anxious Triumph by Donald Sassoon, and in it he says part of Russia's problem by 1914 is that capitalism hadn't really happened in any meaningful sense. But I think there were the beginnings of capitalist modernity in Russia. What that would have eventually looked like is very hard to predict, but Russia was very late in the day emerging from feudalism. So there was a kind of a powerful state emerging there. And so how does this fall into revolution in 1917 and to the chaos of the Civil War? Well, the liberal argument goes it must have been the war and the incompetence of the Tsar. And so the moment that you go down that route, I think that you start to come away from structural explanations, and structural explanations, here's the hill I'll die on, are just more robust. You either, if you dwell in the kind of the great man theory of history, you have to conclude that either historical events are the products of great men or weak men. We can have the incompetent man theory of history. And were it not for the incompetence of Nicholas II, then none of these things would have happened. And history hinges just on the whims of one person. Well, when we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, and the great economic, social, political, cultural, ideological changes, what one man thinks about it or not suddenly becomes irrelevant. I mean, it's true that Nicholas does make himself an irrelevance. Nicholas is poorly suited to being a ruler, and that has some effect. But would the most competent Tsar in Russia's history have had difficulties ruling a country with these powerful contradictions within it? And would they have had difficulty ruling a country that was being endured what it endured during the First World War? And then we get to the revisionist school of history, which is influenced by social history thinking, or the new social history in the 1960s counterculture, where younger Western historians began to challenge the liberal coup narrative. So their core argument was that a genuine mass movement from below was the reason for the revolution. They argued that the Bolsheviks didn't just seize power, they were carried to power on a wave of popular support because of their slogans, peace, bread and land, match the aspirations of the people. I mean, yes, this is largely valid. All of those slogans were in some way a fraud, some way a lie. But let's sidestep that. They didn't intend any of those things. The grievance, the sort of the social grievances of the masses of the population made the collapse of the old order inevitable, regardless of anything Lenin said or did. Yeah, so I mean, this is again, my favorite Soviet historian, Sheila Fitzpatrick. This is kind of where she comes from. And it's fair to say that there is a more than a grain of truth to this, because obviously, when the February Revolution happens, it takes the Bolsheviks by surprise. They don't know it's going to happen. It's spontaneous. It just occurs. It is something that is kind of inchoate and poorly articulated, and a mass outpouring, not of initially revolutionary fervor, but discontent. It spreads like wildfire, again, partly due to the Tsar's errors, but also due to the fact that the country had gone, the civilian population of the country had gone through the economic shocks caused by the war. So there's more in that one. The post-revisionist or cultural turn in the 1990s, and here is where archives matter. So after 1991, there's an archival revolution, and you get historians that suddenly get access to previous secret Soviet archives, and this school begins to synthesize previous views. So if you look at Orlando Figer's Russia: A People's Tragedy, the core argument there is obviously that Russia experiences in 1917 a terrible disaster. Whilst there is, whilst they acknowledge there is a popular uprising, as the revisionists have argued, it results in a brutal dictatorship, as the liberals argue. They look at their mentalities, how people thought and felt, and they examine the role of revolutionary language, symbols, and the breakdown of traditional authority, and argue that the violence of the revolution was rooted in a deep-seated culture of violence in the Russian countryside and the radicalizing effects of World War I. I mean, the waves of violence since the failure of the emancipation is a kind of part of that picture, whether the Russian countryside was more violent than rural parts of the world anywhere else is debatable, but the synthesis there's something in that. I think that the other part of that argument, the revisionist argument, is that the fact that the state ceases functioning by 1917, there has to be something that's beyond repair to overthrow. So post-Soviet Russian historiography from 1991 to the present, which it often comes from within Russia itself, means that the narrative has shifted since the fall of communism. So the core argument of post-Soviet Russian historiography is divided. Some modern Russian historians view the revolution as a national catastrophe that interrupted Russia's natural development as a great power. Others, particularly under the current government, attempt to reconcile the red and the white factions into a single narrative of Russian strength, which is, again, really a kind of a historical fairy tale that is the product of a kind of a need to rewrite history in the interests of the current ruling clique in Russia more than anything else. So probably worth discounting that one for now. So there is a renewed interest at the moment in Russian historiography on the subject of foreign intervention and various conspiracy theories about German and British influence, and a focus on the Orthodox Church and the tragic fate of the Romanov family. So it's very much kind of the post-revisionist arguments, which I find the weakest, which are born of kind of or the post-Soviet arguments anyway, which are born of kind of very sort of toxic Russian nationalist attempts to sort of rewrite the story. I think ultimately I go with revisionist and post-revisionist arguments. I think they are the most meaningful, but I think you also have to combine into this one key idea that it's almost impossible to overthrow a functioning state. It's almost impossible to do that. You have to the state has to cease functioning, and the idea that a people's revolution happened isn't so much the case. I think what happens is the state degrades its ability to function to an extent that its overthrow becomes inevitable. Anyway, there endeth the lesson. So if you're looking for more of that kind of thing, and those sorts of explanations and ideas and arguments that you can take and utilize very quickly in exam conditions and encapsulate that in a structure, come along to the masterclass. The link is below, and join us. It's going to be great. We'll do 90 minutes and it will totally transform how you think about and write about Soviet and Russian revolutionary history. Anyway, take care, and I will catch you on the next podcast, which I'll probably do later today, about the current nightmare that we are as a planet descending into. All the best. Bye-bye.
Switching between tools for one project gets disjointed, especially on tight deadlines. Grammarly built a game-changing writing surface tailor-made for professionals to help you move your ideas forward and sharpen your writing. You can brainstorm ideas, summarize meeting notes in seconds, or strengthen a proposal without context switching. Easy to get started and even easier to finish. Sign up for Grammarly free and get your professional writing from draft to done. Visit Grammarly.com. That's Grammarly.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show,
and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.